So one of the things that was always a priority for me was being able to separate my work life and my personal life. I took a look at careers in, let's say, law or medicine and saw the amount of time that I would have to dedicate to that in terms of my personal life. And I felt like it's important for me to have a position that is, if not 9 to 5, something that I can turn off, right? Something that I don't have to put in 150 hours to make partner every week. That to me has been the sort of guiding star for how I'm able to prioritize my family and my learning. One of the things that I told my friends at a CM recently is that to me, learning is what should be happening all the time. I happen to take a break from my learning, so I go to my 9 to 5 job, but that's not what I wish I was doing.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Stark Take. Stark Take is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, we're joined by Moshe Isaacson. Moshe is a marketing executive. He also is a lover and teacher of Tanach. And I thought that as we approach Chag HaShavuot, it would be cool to get some different perspectives on different limudim, Talmud Torah, which we should always be focusing on, but especially this time of year. So Moshe, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Amazing. Great to.
Okay, before we jump in, a quick personal request to please go hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us grow this show and reach new listeners. So thank you for doing that. Moshe, tell us a little about yourself, your background, your childhood growing up, and a little bit of a different out-of-town community before we jump into the what happens next.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Growing up in Pittsburgh is, I think, radically different than the experience my kids are having growing up in New York. Very out-of-town place, but growing up, I never knew I was in an out-of-town sort of city. Went to day school that had, rebbeim from the Lakewood Kollel, along with, parents where the moms are not necessarily covering their hair, maybe wearing pants. A very broad mix, which for me was very exciting. Got to see a lot of different aspects of Yiddishkeit from different people.
Amazing. And so you had this various exposure to different types. So then how did that lead you to your next stage of going out of Pittsburgh, going to yeshiva? What were your options looking like? What was your worldview at that time?
Sure. So there was no high school in Pittsburgh for me at the time. I went to yeshiva in Silver Spring, Maryland for 4 years. That was also a very interesting experience for me, but really kind of led as a springboard to going to Eretz Yisrael. That's really where my love for learning kind of blossomed. Growing up, my mother certainly instilled a love for learning with me. She was not necessarily in a very strong financial position, but she made sure to hire extra rebbeim, tutors, people to spend time helping me, really appreciate learning. And that for me blossomed in Eretz Yisrael. I went to yeshiva called Derech Eitz Chaim. I was able to really kind of find my place in terms of learning. That's, I think, where learning Tanach specifically became so important for me.
Amazing. And in Silver Spring, that was Yeshiva Greater Washington or somewhere else?
Yes, Yeshiva of Greater Washington. I had the opportunity to learn by Rabbi Lopiansky over there.
Amazing. That's very beautiful. So what was it like for you coming to Israel, following Lebanon in yeshiva, those early experiences of learning with Tanakh? Any details you could share with us that was sort of moments that you realized, wow, there's something really special here that you really wanted to invest lots of time and energy in when you were sort of seeing the light for the first time?
Yeah, for me, it was going on the Tiyulim with the Tanakh in hand and being able to see the stories that we had been reading and learning, which were at the time to me just stories, being able to point to a location and say, hey, that's where the war with the city of Ai took place. And here's where another story from Tanakh comes to life. When you can actually see and touch it and be a part of that story, it becomes so much more real. And then you go back and look and say, let me really try to understand this not as kind of a fairy tale, but as a part of my heritage, where I come from, and the Yerusha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us.
That's very interesting. I mean, that type of tiyul, and I may be a little bit racist here, but like it might be identified with a certain type of a tour guide. He wears a certain type of kippah. He wears certain types of shirts. And so did you at the time view such a limud in a, in that stigma, or was it considered something that even people from other parts of the Torah world would also connect to and love? I'm wondering if that at the time that was a dynamic that you were privy to.
Yeah, I had always kind of heard Tanakh as getting maybe short shrift. The jokes were something to the effect of like, it's great that Tanakh was written so the Gemara has something to quote from, right? That whole approach to me, I'm a bit of a contrarian, so that just made me want to really understand more, what's this limud that is not necessarily put on a pedestal and maybe given sort of second tier. I want to dig into that. I want to understand what is it that is kind of maybe passing other people by. And that's what led me to really kind of roll up my sleeves and start learning it for myself.
So I would love to do some sleeve rolling up together, because I think it's an important question to ask, and to, someone, we take our limud Torah responsibilities seriously, to not be shortchanging and not forgetting parts of Torah that we maybe should. So tell us a little bit more about, why do you think that Tanakh gets the short end of the stick? To what extent do you think people have an obligation to learn Tanakh, know Tanakh on a daily basis, on some sort of other basis? Where you can take this from wherever you want.
Okay, so this is my favorite soapbox ever. I believe that Tanakh is so critical to being a well-rounded Jew. It's Navi, right? It's something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us Ladoros, and to me, it's really an avla. It's a terrible situation that we're in, where large groups of Klal Yisrael just sort of pass Tanakh by. Besides the fact that you have a much more profound understanding of the whole totality of Jewish history when you read through Tanakh, there is a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's built into the text that people, I think, are just completely unaware of. The more I've been able to study Tanakh, the more profound my Yiddishkeit has become, the more I understand the things that I do, not just from a halachic perspective, but from a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu perspective. I think that, even if it's 5-10 minutes a day, just digging in, there are parts of Tanakh that are incredibly difficult. I understand that people can get through, let's say up to Malachim, and then sort of Nevi'im, Achronim. There's challenges there. There's challenges going through Eov, absolutely. But there's challenging Dafim in Shas as well, right? Persevering through that and seeing the totality of Tanakh, there's 929 prakim. A parak a day, less than 3 years, you can finish all of Tanakh. 2 prakim a day, you cut that down in half, right? It's a challenge that can be completed, and it's not overwhelming when you look at it from that perspective, especially, and I tell people this all the time, you read through Chumash every year, right? It's like 187 prakim. You read through the 5 Megillas every year. There's a bunch of Haftorahs that you're already completing. So you have sort of a running start to get through Tanakh. To me, there's no excuse. I've been learning Tanakh with a chevra in my home for the past 8-9 years. We've completed several svarim, in-depth, real deep understanding, going through the Rishonim, going through the text in detail. And that limud is invigorating, not just for myself, but for everybody who's involved, because it activates a different part of the brain. Sure, you're learning Gemara, there's a logical methodology over there, over there. But going through Tanakh in depth and understanding the message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us through the Nevi'im, to me, that's equally as profound. It activates a different kind of part of my brain.
It's very interesting, and you're giving people a lot of credit for their Shnai Mikra capabilities, and halavai, we should all live up to that. So maybe a few other things I wanted to dig into here on this topic. There are indications, and there are some interesting sugyas, Bava Kama, I think maybe Bava Basra as well, about certain Amoraim, Tanaim, who they were unsure about certain psukim. So some people will make the claim, just as today Tanakh is a non-in thing to learn, it's sort of always been that way. Do you subscribe to that theory? No.
I would say almost the exact opposite. It's clear from learning Gemara that the Tanaim and Amoraim knew Tanakh Baal Peh forwards and backwards. Yes, you can find an example here or there where maybe a pasuk was quoted a little bit differently, or there's some questions, but by and large, they're going through all of Tanakh in such a, it's at their fingertips. And to me, the reason for that is beyond the fact that it's Tanakh and you should know it. You can't really understand the Gemara, understand the Shakla B'Tayr of the Gemara well if you don't understand the context, right? If you haven't read through Tanakh and are able, and sometimes you can find yourself asking questions in the Gemara that maybe, it would take a Tosas or Rabbi Akiva Eger to know, hey, there's the pasuk that was quoted, there's another pasuk that contradicts that. Maybe having a deeper understanding of Tanakh can help that limud as well.
Interesting. And another thing that I've heard, that, the reticence, I think that's the right way of pronouncing it, of many to learn Tanakh has to do with the fact that first it was the Maskilim, and then it was the Zionists, various communities that took very, had very severe disagreements with many swaths of the Torah world, also love Tanakh, love to learn Tanakh, love to use Tanakh as a source for their worldviews. So is that true, not true? To what extent you think that is historically relevant or irrelevant to how we approach Tanakh today?
I think that's exactly right. That's definitely historically relevant. The Maskilim were certainly people who got very involved in learning Tanakh. But to me, that's just one more reason for the Torah world to embrace it, right? I would never concede a chelik of Torah to any group who is trying to use it to sort of undermine my religious beliefs. To me, that's an opportunity to dig in and say, let me understand the arguments, let me understand what the concerns are, and let me battle it with Rishonim. Let me battle it with a deep understanding of the material itself. I did a series a while back on biblical criticism, and the more you dig into it, the more you see the veracity of the Torah, the more you understand the beauty of the Torah itself. To me, it's a scary thing to say, well, that's a limud for a group that, who says, who gives anybody a right to take my Yerusha away from me?
And about Eretz Yisrael, you mentioned that your love for Tanakh was connected to your experiences in Eretz Yisrael. So to what extent do you think that maybe some of the Renaissance in limud Tanakh has to do with the connection to Eretz Yisrael? And to what extent do you think people who are not in Eretz Yisrael can connect to Eretz Yisrael through limud Tanakh?
I think that the more you learn Tanakh, the more you're going to understand that Eretz Yisrael is such a special place. It's not the case that you can go through Tanakh and say, okay, Eretz Yisrael has a place, but there are other things that are just as important. Eretz Yisrael is so focal, so key. The entire Tanakh is driving towards a return, right? The Ezra Nehemiah ends with the triumphal return to Eretz Yisrael. It's not a case where you can end Chumash and say, well, I'm sure they live happily ever after. No, there's ups and downs, but the connection to Eretz Yisrael holds true throughout the entirety of Tanakh. And again, that's something that is part of a Yerusha to Klal Yisrael. So the more you can connect to Eretz Yisrael through the learning of Tanakh, the more I think vibrant a person's connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be.
Okay, so you've alluded a couple times in the conversation to various initiatives, programs, limudim that you're involved in Tanakh, and we're going to get back to them in a minute. But before we do, I think it's important to state and to explain the fact that all your love of Tanakh, your teaching of Tanakh, is in addition to the fact that you are a professional, you work in marketing. So let's just digress there for a second. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the world of marketing, and sort of how that decision and career path came about for you.
Sure. It was completely by accident. I actually, in Eretz Yisrael, I asked one of my Rebbeim, Stav, what career should I pursue? Like the Torah doesn't tell me what job to get into. And his response to me was essentially, don't make huge decisions like that. Make the best decision for the next 5 minutes. Make small decisions and they will ladder up to the right decision. I followed that advice when I went to college. I actually ended up majoring in psychology, but found myself at my first job, which was completely focused in marketing. And the way I got there was sort of following that advice of just making good small decisions rather than trying to sort of tackle everything at once. I learned marketing on the fly in my first job and was able to kind of parlay that into greater and greater roles. Now, fortunately, I'm in a role that is called go to market, which is essentially sales and marketing kind of combined for business to business. And in the SaaS software world, that's really growing by storm, especially because of the advances in artificial intelligence.
Interesting. So I also, you talked to Moshe Stav, who was in Derech Eitz Chaim at different points, and I think he may even be there now. And he was also in Karen Biavne, and I had a very close relationship. And so I'm wondering, he's a big inspiration for me and taught me a lot. One of the things he taught me many times in many shiurim was how bad marketing is. And I actually today working in marketing, and you're working in marketing. Is that something you ever heard from him, or did it cause you any pause at any point?
So he didn't mention that to me specifically, but yeah, I learned a tremendous amount from him. And I think the marketing that I try to lead with is more solutions based. It's not kind of flashy and selling the sizzle. It's more about understanding the needs of the customer, the client that you're going to, and making sure that your solutions align with their needs.
Right. I think that's very true. And I think, a lot of the examples he would give about marketing was specifically a type of marketing where you put the milk and the eggs in the back of the store and you have to walk past all the candy to get there, which is the opposite of what you're doing. You're giving them the milk and the eggs wherever they need it and not having to drag them through the candy first.
Yeah, exactly right.
So let's maybe briefly about your sort of the other steps in your career. I'm interested, psychology and marketing, those two are quite connected. Was that part of the journey for you? And what were sort of the subsequent steps along the way?
Yeah. So my intention had been to get a master's in psychology. It was going to be IO psychology, business psychology. So I figured, let me take a year off and learn business before I go into the master's program. And I ended up joining a company called IDT. They were at the time a telecommunications company that had started an entertainment division. They were doing the animation for The Simpsons. They were making feature films. And to me, that was really cool. So I decided to kind of change my track and spend time over there learning marketing hands on, but found that a lot of what I had learned from the psychology perspective fit right into what I was doing, making sure that my messaging was very clear, that people understood the value proposition that I was putting in front of them and how people learn things. All that came from the psychology side, but being able to translate that into a marketing platform really helped.
Interesting. And I work in marketing for a nonprofit, wonderful place, Adi Negev. I'm really happy here. And I've had conversations with different people, and I'm wondering sort of what your take is on the connection between marketing in sort of the B2B corporate world that you are currently in and marketing in the nonprofit world. To what extent those are overlapping fields, they're completely separate, completely the same. How would you advise people? Because I think in addition to me being selfish and wanting to get some guidance myself, many people are helping their shul, helping their local yeshiva, and marketing is something which oftentimes gets tossed around and people have different takes on it. So I'm wondering if you could help guide us in that.
Absolutely. I've actually thought about this quite a bit. And I think that in terms of fundraising and in terms of nonprofits, the messaging that comes across a lot of times needs to be differentiated, right? There are, Baruch Hashem, there are a lot of institutions that are doing great work, but if the message sort of sounds the same, it's very hard for the consumer to understand the difference between, this institution and that institution. Picking a niche and really driving home how the institution you're in is different, that changes the conversation completely. It narrows the scope of who maybe you're talking to. And sometimes that can be scary for institutions who want to feel like, let me talk to the broadest audience possible, because even if we hit them a little bit from a large audience can really add up. And I won't say there's not some wisdom in that, but I think the more you can narrow down and talk to a very specific audience and use the messaging that, like I said, differentiates you, but speaks to the core values of that smaller audience, that's going to activate people at a much higher level to participate, to support, to be involved, because they see themselves in the message. The more, and this is true in marketing all over the place, the more the end user, the customer, the person you're talking to can see themselves in what you're saying to them, the stronger the affinity is going to be. In my role on the software side, I have to make sure I understand my customer just as well as if I was running their business. Because if I can do that, I can talk to them with their language, I understand their pain. Then when I'm presenting a solution to them, that solution isn't something that just plopped out of the sky. That's something that says to them, hey, this guy really gets it. He understands me. He understands my problems, my values, my concerns. And what he's recommending isn't just another cookie cutter solution. It's something tailor made for those values, those problems. Did that
Interesting.
answer
And
your
another,
question?
yeah, I think so. You said that. Yeah, I mean, that was very interesting how you talked about how really understanding, getting into the shoes of the other person, being empathetic and a good communicator, which leads me to another question, which I've thought about a lot, which is the question between sort of the more human side of marketing, as you just described it, and the more business side, analytics, spending, allocations. And I think that, some people, as people who come from a more psychology background want that in their marketing career, want be spending their time focusing on those issues and not crunching on numbers, A/B testing, all of these different things. So, to what extent have you had to sort of balance those two things, or recommend others who are involved in marketing and in being able to both be successful but also be fulfilled in doing a good job on the one hand, more human tailored activities versus also being smart and wise and analytical?
That's a very fair point. And I think that you can't have one without the other. If everything is just sort of messaging and there's no analysis of the success of the message, you could be talking into the void. What I tell people all the time is, I think from my perspective, one of the most critical classes I took as a psychology major was statistics. Being able to understand data trends and patterns, being able to understand how to analyze those to know what's statistically significant has played a huge role in my entire career. It doesn't mean that you only let the data do the talking. You have to have that personal touch and a personal understanding. But if you're creating a bunch of marketing material and you're not analyzing the success, you could be missing a very important message that's buried in the data.
Interesting. One other question on your sort of marketing expertise. You know, everyone who's in any sort of content type position is obviously thinking a lot about AI. And my personal experience is that at the moment, the time that it takes to edit the AI content to make it what I think is worth putting out to the world is basically makes a lot of the AI usage a little bit not worthwhile for now. It could still be it's worth it to learn the skills because it's going to get better. But I was wondering how you sort of have experienced it so far.
So I've seen a lot of change in AI, even in the past 6 months, where it's able to do things better than it had in the past because of the amount of time and effort I put into training the systems and building sort of the skills within the AI that I'm using. I think that's only going to continue to get better. In the past, certainly it took just as long to kind of edit a LinkedIn post that AI produced for me as if I was going to write it for myself, from scratch. And so I did that. I basically just wrote my own content instead. Now I'm finding maybe less on the content side, but more on the AI agents to automate different processes. That has saved me a tremendous amount of time, whether it's on CRM management or analysis of, let's say, deals and calls that I'm involved in. The AI has been trained to a point where it understands what I classify as good or bad and is able to flag those things for me. It saves me a tremendous amount of, operational or administrative time.
Got it. So maybe just again, as we start working our way back to the Tanakh conversation, tell us about what you're currently doing in the marketing world. You've risen to a pretty senior level.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was with a company called Empion for 4 years, headed up the sales and marketing for that company, and was able to grow them from about 10 million in annual recurring revenue to about 50 million. The past 2 months, I actually left that company and joined a startup that's in stealth mode. This is an AI first company that's still in the software space, but helping to build the go to market function for them in an opportunity that I think is a multi-billion dollar market.
Wow. And so you alluded to the fact that before that you grew up in a house where finances were not always so plentiful or challenge. There were challenges there as well. So how has that experience shaped how you sort of make decisions about career, income, and just in general living life?
So one of the things that was always a priority for me was being able to separate my work life and my personal life. I took a look at careers in, let's say, law or medicine and saw the amount of time that I would have to dedicate to that in terms of my personal life. And I felt like it's important for me to have a position that is, if not 9 to 5, something that I can turn off, right? Something that I don't have to put in 150 hours to make partner every week, whatever the case may be. That to me has been the sort of guiding star for how I'm able to prioritize my family and my learning. One of the things that I told my friends at a CM recently is that to me, learning is what should be happening all the time. I happen to take a break from my learning, so I go to my 9 to 5 job, but that's not what I wish I was doing. What I wish I was doing was learning full time. So, being able to balance those two things, but understanding that the priority is my personal life, my avodas Hashem, and that work. Obviously, when you're there, you have to put in 110% to be successful for sure. But is it where my heart is compared to my learning? I can't say that it is.
So I think a lot of us strive to have some sort of version of what you are describing. I'm wondering sort of practically how you've made that work throughout the years. And also, you mentioned the levels of how, to what extent you view your core identity as things beyond work. And then there's your work. So I think there's also some nuance there between that distinction and saying, work is an evil and I hate it and I don't really want to be there at all. And it has nothing to do with my religious identity as a Avodas Hashem. I think that's also sort of incorrect. So how do you make it work practically and also sort of philosophically, ashkafically, conceptually think about that dynamic?
So I think work is very important, and I would never feel comfortable kind of bifurcating myself to say, half of my day I spend doing something that I hate or that I feel is an evil. I believe that in Torah, you have to have both aspects. And there's a reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the opportunity to refine ourselves in the working world just as much as we can outside of the working world. So I try to bring the values that I learn my personal life to my working life to make sure that things are done in an ethical way, that people are treated with fairness and truthfulness. But I still try to understand that that's a b'diavad, right? If I could, I would much rather be spending more of my time learning. So what I try to do to kind of actualize that and make that real for myself is something I learned from Rabbi Rudinsky: steal time for Torah. The way I do that is maybe it's during my lunch break, grabbing a Tanach and just trying to finish off the parak that I wasn't able to do after, Shachris in the morning. 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, whatever the case may be, it brings my mind back to the things that are important to me. The same way being able to stop in the middle of a working day and go daven mincha, that shows me, right? It's almost a self-reflexive kind of thing. That's the term hitpalel is a self-reflexive term that, hey, this is really what's important. This is, connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is what you want to be doing, even if you're not able to do that full time.
Interesting. I mean, some people have come on this podcast and said, things along the lines of like work-life balance, doesn't exist. It's not real. Maybe some of them aren't good at it and therefore are jealous of it. I don't know. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little more to what extent you think that, it could be some people also, various influencers out there give an unrealistic definition of it in the other direction. So how do you sort of define that term for yourself in a way that is both practical, realistic, but also fair to your various commitments beyond your 9 to 5?
So to me, work is time that I've dedicated to a specific pursuit. The same thing goes for learning. If I have, time to set aside for learning, that time is time that I cannot shake for any reason. My kids know if there's a shiur that I'm involved in, it doesn't matter what else is going on in the world. I've dedicated that time, and I have a responsibility to that time being put aside for avodas Hashem. So I believe that both of those responsibilities make me a whole person. I can't have one without the other. I can't, I can't put food on the plates if I'm not at work, but I can't be a whole person if I'm not dedicating that time to learning. And it energizes my whole week. My family knows that when the shiur goes really well, they can tell, because it's been something that I've been excited for the whole week and preparing for the whole week. And then I kind of ride the wave of that excitement into the next preparation. Without those two things, I'm not a whole person. And I feel like I can't separate the two and kind of put my mind into one place at one time and another some other time. Both of those have to coexist. And sometimes that means that after work, I'm reading up on latest trends in AI and how to use that for my working life. That's fine as long as it doesn't impinge on bedtime with my kids or preparing for the next shiur. It's not something where I have to cut that part of my life out. To me, all of that is part of how I grow as a person, and being someone who's always trying to be intellectually curious is really important. I can take that intellectual curiosity and turn it into a passion for learning Torah. I can turn it into a passion for being successful in the working world, but I can't turn it off.
So it's interesting because, one of the things that people, when they talk about the challenge or the impossible mission of work-life balance, they say that the responsibility to work, which you alluded to before, is something which, will oftentimes demand late hours. You need to be committed. Things don't always work on your schedule. There are other stakeholders that have to be pleased. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're sort of saying that keeping boundaries around certain slots of time in your learning and your family is the way to keep those other, those work commitments from encroaching on the other things. Is that a correct read of it? And to what extent is that like Yehar Val Yavor in the way you view it, or there has to be some flexibility with other people that you're working with that are on different time zones and different schedules that you need to be working with and keeping them happy?
So I try to be fair and use my seichel. There are times where there's a conference the same day that I usually give the shiur, and so I can't give the shiur that week, but I owe that time, right? And if that means that I'm traveling to the conference and I'm on the plane for 3 hours, then I'm going to make up that time in other ways. To me, the most important thing is the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the way that I feed that relationship and the way that I know that I'm committed to that relationship is by the time and effort that I expend. Sometimes, things happen that are outside of my control, and, you have to make the best that you can with the situation that you're given, but it doesn't exempt you from the commitments that you've made. It's just about finding another way to pay that time back, or to reinvest the energies that you're given in a way that feels like you're still committed to that relationship and to that growth.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, we started out with your love of Tanakh. Then we went to your career and sort of your time management, your work-life balance. I want to bring it all the way back. You've alluded to the shiur. So maybe tell us about the shiurim, the teaching that you're doing, the commitments that you have in terms of your limud Tanach, your other limudim that sort of have allowed you to continue to grow in your knowledge of Tanakh and your teaching of Tanakh, even though you're also busy with a lot of things professionally as well?
Sure. Well, I think it really started when my wife told me that we were expecting our second child, my first daughter. We decided we wanted to do something as a kind of zechus for the baby. So my wife and I started to learn Tanakh together. This was really the first time that I went through all of Tanakh beginning to end. We spent 2 years doing that. And since then, it's just been a regular limud for me. I was actually lucky enough to learn through Tanakh with my daughter, to have her make a siyum at her bat mitzvah 12 years later. But that annual sort of commitment really grew into something where I felt at a certain point, let me share this with others. So for the past 9 years, I've run a chabura that we call Tanakh in Depth. It really started with a series that we did called Villains in Tanakh, and that was some of the marketing to try to get people excited about learning Tanakh. That's been a regular limud that I've had for, like I said, about 8-9 years. I do also give a weekly daf. It's actually a yard site share for a friend of mine who passed away, but we're going through Masechtas Sota together. I also have share Friday nights for people in my neighborhood. We're going through, at this point, we're finishing up Pirkei Avos, but trying to do that also in a little bit more depth. I call it Pirkei Avos for adults. The idea across, I think, all of the different limudim is to take very seriously material that maybe, like we said at the beginning, gets plays second fiddle sometimes. Really diving into that and trying to understand the beauty and the depth of that material has been, for me, one of the greatest joys of my life.
Interesting. So that's, I think, if I'm keeping score at home correctly, that's 3 weekly shiurim. That's like basically on an average of almost every other day. So how do you find time to prepare and get yourself ready for these shiurim, or are you just winging it and reading it and going as you go along?
No, it's I'm an early bird. I try to get up pretty early, and that gives me a lot of time to myself. I'll have a couple hours in the morning that I can use to prepare for the shiurim. I have, Baruch Hashem, a pretty extensive library that I'm able to tap into, and time, traveling to and from work, where I get to sort of prepare, review, make sure that I know what I'm talking about, because to me, that time is time that I'm committed to. So being able to give a share is a commitment. It's a commitment from the people who show up, and I want to make sure I honor their time. But it's also a commitment from me to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to say, this is something that I'm dedicating. And so if I'm going to do that, like any korban, it has to be beautiful. It has to be perfect.
Wow. And like, how early are we talking about in the mornings?
Somewhere between 4:30 and 5:30 on a daily basis.
Wow. And then you mentioned the commute, which is interesting. What type of, like, are you train, driving, busing? What's the setup there?
Yeah, I'm on a train for about an hour each way each day, so that gives me close to 2 hours to kind of dedicate as well.
Wow. I do, think that anyone, I think the trains are by far a better Makom Torah than the buses and the cars of the world. And so I guess it's a bracha for those who are able to make use of that time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this has been a great conversation. We covered a lot of ground. Maybe to sort of, as we transition towards the end, you mentioned you're teaching Pirkei Avos and Tanakh. So if we talk about, Bnei Torah in the workforce, work-life balance, career success, learning success, do you have any sort of famous ideas that are maybe from some of these off the beaten places that, and by the way, for the audience, like, this is Moshe's going on. I didn't prepare Moshe for this question. So off the top of your head, anything that comes to mind from some of the limudim that you're involved in that provide sort of a unique insight and unique perspective on some of the challenges involved in the Ben Torah and the workforce dilemmas?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. So I think that, it kind of gives me pause. One of the things that I really found interesting in exploring, sort of tying Tanakh to learning Shas, is the parallels between different stories. So Shavuos is coming up. A pattern that I noticed in Megillas Rus sort of reappears in a Agadata in Chagiga, where you have Rebbe Meir following Elisha in sort of a very similar way that Rus is following Naomi. And finding those kinds of patterns in Agadatas and comparing them to stories in Tanakh was something that really kind of sparked my interest. But to take a step back from that, finding patterns across different topics, different areas of study, that's really what a lot of learning is about, right? When you're comparing two sugyas in a Gemara, that's what you're doing. You're looking at patterns across different areas that maybe don't necessarily go together. I think that is something that can sort of actualize a person's mind in a way that is so foreign to the rest of the world, right? People who are not learning Torah, they're not able to find that kind of mental stimulation, and it gives you great insights into beyond just Torah learning into the working world. When you're looking at, approaching a problem and you're bringing a Torah perspective to thinking in a different way, that unlocks so much creativity that I think is absent from a lot of other sort of more analytical ways of approaching things. That I think that you can't have one without the other. Meaning, if you're not using your full mind when you're learning Torah, then you're not going to be able to use your full mind in the working world. The two go hand in hand. The more you do one, the more you can do the other. They're complementary. And to me, like I said before, I can't be half a person. I think that anybody who is serious about their learning is able to find the areas of learning that excite them and bring that into the working world, and vice versa, can find the learning the that exists in the working world, bring it into the Torah world, and the two of them are better for it.
One of the things that I've found in my sort of short career as a balabas is the fact that sometimes excitement can be contagious. So if I once learned the sugya in yeshiva that I was really excited about, and then I'm going through that yomi and it's don't have a lot of time and I'm sort of rushing through it, but then I find that exciting sugya that I learned well back in the day. So, even though we're not always able to bring the full level of excitement as maybe we'd always want to with various limitations on our schedule and on our time and on our energy, but sometimes, making sure that there are at least some parts of your learning that are really exciting to you that sometimes carries over to other areas. And when you spoke about, so if you want to add on anything on that, I'm happy to hear, but you also said, between the learning and the working, there's an overlap there. There's a way of applying patterns, approaches, ways of thinking about things. I'm wondering if you can give an example from your sort of own life where you had some sort of Torah outlook that you're able to bring to your marketing or to your other things that you're doing in business.
So I would say it ties back to that pattern finding. One of the first things I did at the last company I was at was try to understand who the audience is. And the more I spoke to, the customer base was very all over the map. They had customers that were Subway restaurants, wineries, and a lot of customers in the healthcare space. So being able to take a step back and look at the pattern and say, hey, the customers that are in the healthcare space get a greater value from the software that we have than any of the other customers. That told us, let's narrow in our focus and just go after the healthcare customer base, right? Being able to take that step back from all the noise and look at the pattern that emerges, that's something that came from my limud in Tanach. Being able to compare one story in Tanach to another to see what it teaches you, to notice that the Pilegesh Begiva story has many of the aspects of the Lot and Sodom story. That only comes from being able to take a step back instead of being very granular in the text word by word, looking at the overall pattern and saying there's meaning in the pattern itself beyond just the pratim and the details. So that's something that I think that kind of approach, like I said, it benefits both sides of the world, the working world and the Torah world at the same time.
Okay, so you put out a nice amount of your stuff that you're teaching online. So where do people find that? And I also did notice, I don't think I got a chance to listen to this yet, but some AI powered content in the Torah space. I wonder if you could share about that and where people can track it down.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you search up Tanach in depth, certainly on Spotify, on Apple, you'll be able to find the podcast over there. Also on Twitter as @Isaacson. The AI content is something from Notebook LM. Where I'm starting to play around with some of the AI tools and producing content where it takes articles, essays that are online, distills them down, and it allows you to also interact kind of with the AI and give it a little bit of guidance. There's going to be, I think, a lot of changes in the way content is created as AI gets smarter, more useful. And I want to make sure that I understand it, that I've rolled up my sleeves and played with it myself rather than just being kind of a passive consumer.
Okay, amazing. So we'll definitely put links to that in the show notes. Everyone should definitely go and check that out. And who wants to start some good Tanach limudim. And by the way, any other sort of good Tanach resources, someone who's inspired by this conversation and wants to jump on the Tanach train, besides for your stuff that we'll link in the show notes, anything else you want to give a shout out to?
I mean, there's tremendous amount of shiurim on YU Torah that I get a lot of inspiration from. Certainly, I learned a lot from Rabbi David Katz. He has a Jewish history series, and a lot of times that overlaps with some of the limudim in Tanach. So, highly recommend that as well.
Okay, amazing. So now let's go to our lightning round. 3 short questions, 3 hopefully short answers. We're in the summer. We have nice long Shabbos afternoons. What do you like to do at that time?
So, Shabbos afternoon is time for me to spend with my kids. Each one of my kids, I try to get a little bit of time to learn with them, play with them, games, whatever the case may be.
Okay, amazing. You mentioned your love for Tanakh, so I'll take this middle question about Tanakh. If you had to choose one sefer of Tanakh as your favorite that you find having a personal, deep connection to.
Wow. I would have to say Sefer Shmuel. I spent 2 years learning it and then 2 years teaching it, and it's very dear to my heart.
Okay, and finally, if you were forced to leave the marketing world, leave the professions that you've been involved in up until now, and find a new job in a new industry, maybe something you dreamed of doing as a kid, what would that be?
Oh, definitely psychology. It's a tremendous love of mine and something I'd love to pursue.
Okay, Moshe Isaacson, thank you for coming today. This has been a really interesting conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much.